Are you interested in a piece of cake? What if I told you it was under 5 bites or points? What if I told you it was under 4? How about under 3? This is my late Washington pie, but don't let the name fool you. Just like Boston cream pie, this is a delicious cake. It's a long-lost dessert that I'm going to put a new fashion spin on that'll make it perfect for any weight loss journey. So if you'd like to see how this is done, stick around because it's coming up next. Hello and welcome to my kitchen. My name is Roy. I'm a home cook and amateur baker, and I'm here on this channel sharing recipes that have helped me to lose over 125 pounds, whether those recipes are mine or someone else's. Now today is one of mine, but it's based on an old recipe that we happened to find on a Filene's menu from 1917. Paul had sent me this image of the menu just because it was very interesting, not only to see the different foods they had, but also to see how low the prices were compared to what we deal with today. But I'm sure it's comparable, probably based on what they were making at the time. But anyway, I will show you here the Filene restaurant menu, and you can see it's for a midday meal, and it's for Monday, May 14th, 1917, and you can get soft shell crabs for 75 cents. They had a club luncheon for 75 cents. They had notices that no order served for less than 25 cents per person. Criticisms of our food and service are invited. They also have down here an explanation of terms in case you're not sure what Puree Saint-Germain is, and I had no idea. But as I was looking on the specials, I noticed on the wagon down here, ready at 12 o'clock, and it was a crown of lamb with mint jelly, paprika, potatoes, and spinach, but just underneath it, on the pastry wagon, there was Washington pie and French pastry. Now, I don't know about you, but I had never heard of Washington pie before. So I did a little investigating, and I found out that it was an old pie from like the 1850s is when it originated. And it was made in this preparation that I'm going to make it today. It did later change and people made adaptations. There is even a version that is baked in a pie shell using old cake. And it's, I guess, kind of like a bread pudding. I do have a link to the original recipe that I found for both the Washington pie and the Washington pie bread pudding version. If you guys want to check that out, I think that would be interesting to make this into a bread pudding in a pie shell. Maybe. I don't know. But that was one of the later iterations of this recipe. But I am basing it on the original recipe that I found. Now, just like the Boston cream pie, this is not a pie. This is a cake with a filling, and typically what was on top was a dusting of confectioner's sugar. You could add whipped cream or ice cream on the side, or however you want to serve it. I am going with the traditional sense, although as you saw on the thumbnail and on my board back there, I'm calling this new-fashioned Washington pie because even though I am following the original recipe, I'm making it much better on bites, points, calories, and macros. But why was it called a pie, just like Boston cream pie? Well, it comes to do not with the dessert itself, but with the equipment that they had to use. They were all baked in the same pan, so sometimes you get like a Boston cream pie or Washington pie, which is actually a cake. Now, it was common in the 1800s, early 1900s, for desserts that were meant for a special occasion to be named after a president, which is how this came to be known as Washington pie. I had thought maybe there had something to do with cherries in it because he's famous for chopping down a cherry tree, but no cherries. But let us go over what ingredients we do have. I have here 1 cup of all-purpose flour. I have here 4 eggs that are at room temperature. You always want any cold ingredients such as eggs, butter, cream, milk, even applesauce. I'd had my applesauce in the fridge, so I took it out. You want everything at room temperature, as I've said before, because that helps things get more homogeneous, mixed together more easily. So make sure that your things are at room temperature. I have here, as I mentioned, 1/2 cup of applesauce. Here I have 1 cup of sugar replacement. And here I have a 1/2 cup of strawberry jam. And this is the jam that I'm using from Skinny Girl, sugar-free. And this is the strawberry rosé. All of the jams that they have are kind of drink inspired. Smucker's also has some great jams, so you can try those. The first one I tried this with, which came closest to the original, was they have one called Blackberry Mule. And that was very good, but for this one I'm using strawberry. Traditionally, this is made with a raspberry jam filling. If you've been following this channel at all, you know that I'm not a fan of raspberries. So I changed it up. The blackberry is different enough. It doesn't have as astringent a bite as raspberry does to me. So blackberry was fine. I'm okay with blackberries. But because raspberry jam was what was typically used, and they usually ask for some sort of tart filling, I ended up adding 1 teaspoon of lemon juice, just to make it a little more tart and try to replicate that raspberry without using the raspberry. I also have here 1 tablespoon of confectioner sugar replacement. Now I did mention in a previous video where I tested brown sugar replacements that I was looking for confectioner sugar replacements. I ended up buying 1, not testing a lot of them, but this is the brand that had the best for Paul flavor because it didn't have any aftertaste of any kind. So I got the same brand of confectioner sugar, same thing, no aftertaste, and that is the Bestie sugar replacement. I'm not sponsored by them at all. I'm just letting you know this does not have any aftertaste whatsoever. It is monk fruit and allulose blend, and those are the only 2 items in here. So that is very good. I also ended up doing a glaze for some scones I was attempting to make, but the glaze came out fairly well. So I will be using this if and when I can get those scones exactly how I want them. And last but not least, I have 1 teaspoon of baking powder and 1/4 teaspoon of table salt. I also have my oven preheated to 350 degrees, and I have 2 cake pans that are 8-inch. If you want, and you don't have a cake pan that's 8-inch, you could use a pie plate. Obviously, that's what they used to do. That's where it got its name. I also have some parchment rounds that I use and some cooking spray. I have a large bowl to do my mixing in, and I have my scale, but I'll show you that after. All right, so let me shuffle a few things around and we'll get started. Okay, so first things first, I have my flour. I'm going to add in the baking powder and the salt and just whisk that together. As I've said before, you don't want pockets of salt or baking powder. You want to be able to distribute that evenly throughout the flour so that when it gets into the cake, you're not going to have salty spots or spots where there's too much baking powder and you get big holes. So I'm going to set that aside. Bring in my eggs, and I have my sugar replacement and my applesauce standing by. And now what we're going to do is blend the eggs for about 3 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes. We want the eggs to get very pale yellow and frothy and thicken up. So I'm going to beat these on like a medium high for about 3 to 4 minutes, and then I will show you the result. Okay, so it's been about 3 minutes, And you can see how light and fluffy these eggs are now. What this is going to do is help get some air into this batter and help with the lift. These aren't going to be very thick cakes, but we do need a little bit more lift than what the baking powder is going to give us. So now that the eggs are at the correct state, I'm going to add in the sugar as I'm mixing. And then I just mixed it for like 30 seconds to get that incorporated. Now the next thing we're going to add in is our applesauce. We're going to have all of our wet ingredients right here in this one bowl. So let me mix that in and then we will move on. So now we have our eggs, our sugar replacement, and our applesauce in here. Now we're just going to add in the flour and the baking soda and salt that are in there with it. And we're just going to stir this in and let that flour hydrate. And you don't want to over mix this, which is why I'm not using the mixer for this part. Because if you over mix a cake, as I've mentioned before, it does make it more bread-like, a little tougher texture, and that is not what we're going for. And if you see any pockets, just stir them in, but you just don't want to get too aggressive with your cake batters. Okay, and it looks like all of the flour is incorporated. Now let me clean up a little bit before I move on. All right, so I've sprayed my pans liberally with cooking spray. I didn't use baking spray this time, not that you can't, I just didn't have any on hand, so I liberally sprayed it with cooking spray. Now I'm going to take my parchment rounds. This just helps to release a little bit easier. And what I do is I tap that down to get some of that cooking spray on there, and then I flip it and set that in place, making sure that the corners are nice and smooth. Now, I believe, have parchment rounds of different sizes on my Amazon storefront. But if you're just using parchment paper, you don't honestly have to even use parchment paper. You could just do a little dusting of flour in there. But if you are using parchment, which does help with release, what you would do is take a sheet of parchment, lay this down on it, draw a circle around the bottom, and then cut just inside that circle. Because you're marking it from the outer edge, you want it to fit on the inner edge. So you'd cut just inside that circle to make that fit, and then just do as I'm doing now. Set those in. Okay, now since we're dividing it between two pans, what I'm going to do is weigh my pans. And I know that one of them is like 10 grams more than the other. So I'm going to switch this over to grams, and then I'll see which one. This one's 278. This one's 268. So I will start with the heavier one, and I'm going to add as approximately half of this batter in here. And I mean, you can just approximate, or you could even use cups if you wanted. And it doesn't have to be that precise. I mean, you want them close, but you don't have to get as crazy as I am about it. Okay, so let me get rid of this and I'll be back. Okay, so I have my two pans filled here. I'm going to put them in my 350-degree oven for 20 minutes. After 10 minutes, I'm going to take them and swap positions and also rotate them just in case there are any hot spots in the oven. This helps to make sure that things are evenly baked. So these will go in, and I'll be back in 20 minutes to show you what they look like. Okay, so there we have them, nice and browned on top. You can see a lot of air pockets that have grown in there. So now what we have to do is let them cool in the pan for just about 5 minutes. Also let the pan cool down a little bit. But while I'm doing that, I'm going to take my lemon juice and add it to my jam, and then just mix this all together. Now the jam can sometimes be a bit stubborn and hold on to its shape, but this one seems to be doing fairly well. I think because it's at room temperature, it's not as difficult to merge together as if it were just out of the fridge. But this is going to be our center. I have our topping here. Just gonna let these cool down for 5 minutes. Okay, so it's been about 5 minutes. I'm gonna take my pot holder and take the pan. It's still a little warm. It's not overly hot, but it is still hot. And try to finagle it out of the pan into my hand. Remove the parchment and then lay it down here so it can cool. Now you can see it didn't get that dome that a lot of cakes will get. That's not going to happen with this cake. Now, if you don't trust yourself to take it out that way, the other way that I have had to do it is to just take the cake pan, put it near the rack, and flip it out that way. So either way that you get the cake out, you have to get the cake out. And remove the parchment, because otherwise that parchment will keep moisture in there. You do not want that. So I'm going to let these cool. This is the hard part. You have to let them cool completely. It's going to be about 1.5 to 2 hours before they're able to be assembled. So I will be back when we're ready to do that. Okay, so it's been over 2 hours. These are definitely cooled down. So now what I'm going to do is transfer one of these cakes to the plate, and I'm going to spread it with our jam. And it may seem like a lot right here, but once it gets spread out, it will be a perfect little layer in there. Actually, a number of the recipes that I read did have more jam than this. And I thought it was a little too much, but whatever you feel like doing, if you feel like doing more, go right ahead. One thing I will mention, and one thing that Paul is not a fan of as far as cutting into this, is that because of the jam, if you try to cut it with a fork, it will slide a little bit, but most of the recipes did say that it is better the next day. And I think that's because the jam has soaked into the layers a little bit more, but you do what you want to do. Now I'm just going to spread this evenly and spread it out to the edge as much as I can. Okay, that looks even enough. Now what you want to do is take the other piece of cake, and I am going to actually flip it so that the top is in the middle. This is actually very common in cakes. If you ever go to a bakery and you're like, how do they get the top of that cake so smooth? It's by doing this and using the bottom of the cake, which is naturally smooth, as the top. So I'm just gonna press that down a little bit. If any of the jam is seeping out, I'll just wipe that away, but it shouldn't leak out too much. And now the last step is just to take our powdered sugar replacement and tap that over the top with a sieve. And this does not work exactly the same way as powdered sugar. I did try glazing some scones, as I think I mentioned earlier, and it didn't really set up the way that confectioner's sugar would. And also, it doesn't cling as much to the cake. Now I'm going to tap it a little bit just to spread it out, kind of give it a little dimension there. But you could just leave it powdered as it was. I just like making sure it's spread a little more evenly and giving it a little texture on there. Now, just so you know, just like regular confectioner's sugar, this will absorb into the cake, especially once you've covered it, and it's going to disappear, but you'll still get the flavor and the sweetness from it, so don't worry. And you could always put it on as you serve it if you'd prefer that. So there you have it, a Washington pie, an old classic that hasn't been seen for quite some time, but I'm glad I found it so that we can share this recipe together. Now this will make 8 servings, And let me show you, get a nice little chunk of cake here for your serving. Now you could, if you chose to, make it smaller, obviously. Now for 1/8 of this dessert, this is only gonna be 1 bite or Old Blue Point. I'm on the Healthy Better Balance plan, which is equivalent to the old WW Blue plan. And those are the bites and points that I give. Your points may vary based on the plan that you are on. But a nice chunk of cake for just 1 bite. Now, if you're following calories, the calories for a piece of this cake is 109. And if you're following macros, the fat is 2.5 grams. The carbs are 43.1 grams. The fiber is 4.5 grams. And the protein is 4.7 grams for 1/8 of this cake. Now, as you saw, very few ingredients in this cake, but it's a nice little dessert, especially if you're having coffee or tea or what have you, or just a little something after dinner. Now, you don't have to use raspberry jam, obviously, because I did not, but you don't have to use strawberry. You can use any flavor jam you want. You don't even have to put in the lemon juice if you don't want to, but that little tartness does really help against the sweetness of the cake, which really isn't too sweet. But I hope that you will give this a try, this old classic that I've given a new twist to. And if you'd like to make this, the recipe, of course, will be on my blog. And I will link directly to this recipe in the description box, as well as to the blog itself if you're looking for any of my other recipes. Also down there are links to my Amazon storefront. If anything I've used is of interest, it may be there. My Fetch rewards, my Built Bar rewards, and my social media, both the Instagram and 2 Facebook groups that I am part of. So go check out the description box for all sorts of information. Well, I guess it is dessert time for us. We've had our dinner and now it's definitely time for dessert. So until next time, bye.